Okay, so what is this classical education anyway? Here's the real meat, and this is the number one question we received. This was taken from an Introduction to Classical Education, a guide for parents, which you can find on the website if you need further information on this. Here are some definitions that have been floating around. There's a bunch of them. There's a lot of definitions because classical education has been around for thousands of years, and it's been changing. But let's just take a few of these. The linguistic and cultural definition. Some say it's a study of Greek and Latin languages and the history, literature, art, and philosophy and culture of Greek and Roman civilization. Yeah, it's a little narrow. Let's take the intellectual history definition. A study of great ideas of Western civilization is contained in the classic great books produced by that civilization. A study of the best that has been thought or said. Yeah, that's not quite it either. How about the curricular definition? A study of the 7 liberal arts of grammar, logic, rhetoric, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. Somewhat, yes. Let's take this definition for our purposes tonight. And this is where we blend this together to state what we mean by classical education. We feel here at Grace, a classical education is a traditional and enduring approach to education that blends Christian theology with the historic teaching of the 7 liberal arts in order to produce societal leaders characterized by wisdom, virtue, and eloquence. The verbal arts, which is the trivium, I'll talk about that some, the quantitative arts, which is the quadrivium, supply not only the content of learning, but more importantly, the tools of learning, to instill the love of learning for a lifetime. Meaning, this is a Christ-centered curriculum. All courses are biblically integrated. This is not a public school education with a Bible class thrown in. Meaning, it's academically challenging. Your student will come out of it academically competent. It emphasizes a rich exposure and appreciation to the art and the history of Western civilization, including its language, like Latin, its philosophy and literature, the great books, and so forth. Every child deserves a classical education, and we want to instill a love of learning. And it is time-tested. What do I mean by time-tested? Let's just take a look at this timeline. It started back in 600 BC, where the Greeks and the Romans founded classical education. They were the ones who came up with the whole democratic republic government type principles. It was codified or formalized then during the Middle Ages when we create this whole idea of a trivium and quadrivium, and at that point they added theology to it. That continued on up through till about the Dark Ages when it started to wane. Come about Renaissance time, there was a big classical revival, but it was really during the Reformation in the year 1517 and beyond where they added the scriptural foundation and authority to the classical education. And that continued on up through the Enlightenment. In other words, our founding fathers were classically trained. The Enlightenment, though, now started to introduce naturalism and elevating of the intellect of man, which then brought us into the modern era where we've had a real erosion of classical education and have moved to what we call progressive education. The point I'm trying to make in a slide here, though, is you and I have been progressivized. That's all we've ever known, okay? Classical education has been around for over 1,000 years. It is not the new kid on the block. It has been around, but because we've been so progressivized, it seems like, wow, this is something new. I like this quote by C.S. Lewis. He says, when we have lost our way, the quickest way forward is usually to go home. Or even T.S. Eliot says it better. We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will to be arrive where we started, and know the place for the first time. Well, with classical education, we're knowing that place for the first time. Classical education puts emphases on the things in the blue boxes, whereas progressive education puts emphasis in the things in the green boxes. So a classical training, we focus on the tools of learning. We teach them how to learn, where the progressive education model is like teach rote content, teach them what to learn, teach them what to think. We want to teach them how to think. Classical education integrates the subjects together. That's how you remember this stuff. That's how it comes alive, as opposed to individualized subjects in the traditional education model, where you have a history course totally disconnected from a math course, totally disconnected from your English literature course. In classical education, we bring these things together. Classical education has an absolute biblical foundation, where, of course, progressive education is a relative humanistic foundation. Classical education talks about broad, timeless ideas and content, things that don't change, things that have been around for a long time and will be around for a long time to come. Whereas, if you notice in your public school system, there's a lot of electives being given of things that have such a short shelf life. Yeah, you can teach a student how to program in C++, I should know about that, but it's obsolete within a year and a half. And then what do they have? With classical education, we're going to give them the tools for how to write, how to speak, public speak, how to debate, things that they're going to be able to use for a lifetime. And then, of course, classical education emphasizes Western exceptionalism over multiculturalism in our culture today. I like this diagram, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time on it, but just take a look here at this guy with the fishing pole. This slide emphasizes the tools of learning. We want to teach them how to learn and give them tools. There was an adage, this man with a fishing line, that says if you give a man a fish, he eats a meal. But if you teach him how to fish, he eats for a lifetime. Close parallel. Or take this lady over here, carving some wood. Pretend your wood is the subject, okay? There will always be wood enough to carve. There are other subjects and fields of knowledge. But if you give the student a sharp blade, they can carve whatever new wood that they can find. In other words, students that have mastered the trivium, the verbal arts, have the tools now to study and master any subject they choose. In fact, they'll be ready for college, and they'll be ready for the rest of their lives. So, the trivium here is broken into three parts. These are the verbal arts: grammar, logic, and rhetoric. Grammar is a phase that you enter that talks about language skills and things like lots of bits of information and knowledge. And it's usually done in the elementary school years when kids are good at absorbing stuff like that. So that's when you learn your times tables and you learn your cities and states and geography and stuff like that. You want to acquire as many words and manage as many concepts and facts as possible during that phase. And so we introduce the study of Latin or Greek in that time, because that helps you with your understanding of grammar and vocabulary. Okay, then next over here is the rhetoric or logic phase, which, according to Dorothy Sayers, corresponds to middle school years, where students now begin to question ideas and authority, and they want to have a debate or an argument, or they want to take things apart. I had a son who took my camera apart. Didn't get it back together either, broke his eye. This is when they want to make analytical connections about these different facts and ideas that they learned during the grammar phase. It's the analytic and logical reasoning. And then finally, when you get into high school, according to Dorothy Sayers, you enter the poetic phase. And that is when now students take all the concepts that they've learned, all the facts and grammar, all the analytic tools and logic, and they start putting it together to refine for themselves debate, public speaking, and the written word, so that they can develop it in a way that is persuasive, okay? And they have all those concepts to do that. Now you'll notice here that all these three phases are combined here with history. So if you do this, ideally, you're going through it 3 times. In the grammar phase, in the elementary years, you go through history, then you do it again in the middle school years, and you do it again in the high school years. Now, we only have a high school, so we're going to have to play a little catch-up. Most likely, in the grammar school or middle schools, they do grammar pretty well. We're going to have a little bit of each phase, but the high school is going to concentrate mainly on the rhetoric phase. All right? So that is the trivium. And I kind of liken it to the biblical passage, for example, Proverbs 5, 1-2. My son, attend unto thy wisdom, incline ear to my understanding. Thou mayest deserve discretion, that thy lips may keep knowledge. So in other words, knowledge, that's like the grammar phase. Understanding and discretion, that sort of lines up with the logic phase. And then when you put all that together, you gain wisdom. That's kind of the rhetoric phase. That's the way I kind of like to think of it. Then that moves on up to the quantitative phase, or the quadrivium up here. This is where you're dealing with numbers, okay, instead of verbal arts. So arithmetic is pure numbers, quantities outside of time and space. Music forms the relationships between quantities, which can be physics as well. Geometry, which are numbers in space, and that includes art and architecture and things like that. And then finally you get astronomy, which is numbers in space and time. So that incorporates calculus and your sciences. So we have everything there with those 7 liberal arts. We homeschooled our children. My children went through classical education. My oldest daughter just graduated this past May from Grove City College. And this is just an example of some of the courses that she went through in her high school years. For grammar, we did English grammar and composition using the Shirley method and IEW. She had Latin 1, 2, and 3. She even had classic Greek. She had Spanish 1 and 2 and went over to Spain to get fluent in Spanish. She had a dialectic phase where she had logic 1 and 2, algebra and geometry. A rhetoric phase where she really honed her writing skills, persuasive essay, rhetoric 1 and 2, team policy debate, to the point where she's working now as a staff writer, so she's really honed those skills. History, she ate this up. She had 4 years of great books where she read the Bible, she read Homer, Virgil, Josephus, Calvin. She read Homer, the Iliad and Odyssey. She read Sophocles. She read Plato's Republic, Aristotle, the basic works, Virgil, the Aeneid. She read Augustine's Confessions, Bede, the ecclesiastical history of the English people, just to name a few. And yes, we did science. We did biology, chemistry, physics, and anatomy and physiology, all with labs. And fine arts and physical education were all part of that. So that's part of the classical education. Some of the benefits that you get from classical education, I think, are obvious. You're going to be competent. You're going to have a solid fundamental foundation. There's going to be substantive learning going on. You'll have the ability to speak and write confidently and articulately. By discussing in class, you will have well-practiced minds. You'll train them for critical thinking. Giving them biblical information, they will build their character. They will learn about honor. They will build deep friendships with that community. They will have a sense of purpose and something well done. And they will come out with a Christian worldview, and hopefully will be able to defend it when they get to college. We don't have a school yet, so we can't say where your students are going to go from here. But what we can say is we are a member of the Association of Classical and Christian Schools. And based on what those member schools are doing that are already established, these are some of the colleges. This is just a sample that I could fit on one slide. On the left-hand side are some of the Christian colleges. Grove City's listed there that my daughter went to. In the middle are some of the national universities, some of which are Ivy League schools. And on the right-hand side are some of the other liberal arts colleges that include the Naval Academy and the West Point. So a pretty good representation there. If you look at SAT performance, we look at this against a college and career readiness benchmark, you will see that ACCS schools are way up there. You will also see public schools are way down there. If you look at the 2013 PSAT scores, you will see that ACCS schools do better on the average than other private schools in the nation. So, in summary, we're back to this diagram. Put that in your mind. Don't forget it. Those core pillars. This is a time-tested thing. It is a new, old way of educating students, and it's had a long history of success. It integrates the subjects so that history and math come alive instead of being disconnected and boring. And it is the means that has produced most of our nation's great thinkers. It is Christ-centered. All subjects based on the principle that the Creator God is creator of all that exists, and all knowledge is interrelated and points back to Him. And by the way, God has given parents the responsibility for the education of your children. And it is our intent as a school to come alongside of you, okay, to instruct your students under your delegated authority. We want to build character. We want to build biblical standards of conduct that are applied in all areas of school life, acknowledging that Jesus Christ is Lord of all. We want to be academically competent, and I think I said enough about that. We want to build a nurturing community where parents and teachers share a commitment for teaching their children the love of learning and growing in godliness. We want to show the students that they are loved. We want to build the respect of students for their parents and teachers. We want to expose them to the greatest things, the greatest and most influential book of all time, the written, inspired Word of God, absolutely. We want to expose them to the great books, the best that have ever been written. We want to expose them to the best music ever composed, the best buildings and architecture that has ever been built. We want to show them the best scientific advancements that have ever been forged. We want to show them the most glorious of the flowering of human creativity that inspired and directed in us as in God's image. But most of all, we aim to develop young men and women of godly character and virtue who have minds for truth, hearts for Christ, and a desire to serve both God and society, and all to the glory of God. Now, isn't that what you want for your students? Thank you.